The year is 1619. A ship appears on the horizon off Point Comfort, Virginia. Its sails are weathered, its hull carries human cargo. 20 Africans step onto American soil as indentured servants. A legal fiction that will crumble within a generation. What begins as servitude will harden into something far darker. Something that will scar a nation for centuries. This is not just history. This is the story of how a nation built on freedom became the architect of bondage. How human beings were transformed into property. How families were destroyed by the stroke of a pen. How resistance burned beneath the surface of every plantation, every auction block, every chain, and how the echoes of those chains still rattle through the corridors of American life today. In 1641, Massachusetts becomes the first colony to legalize slavery. Virginia follows, then Maryland, the Carolinas, Georgia. One by one, the colonies codify what had been practiced into law. The distinction between indentured servitude and chattel slavery crystallizes. White servants can earn freedom. Black laborers cannot. The color line is drawn in ink and blood. By 1705, Virginia's slave codes are explicit. Enslaved people are property, not persons. They can be bought, sold, inherited, punished without recourse. A master who kills an enslaved person during correction faces no prosecution. The law presumes no one would destroy their own property intentionally. The logic is circular, the cruelty absolute. In Charleston, South Carolina, the Sullivan's Island quarantine station processes 40% of all enslaved Africans brought to North America. Historians call it the Ellis Island of Black America, but there are no dreams of opportunity here. Only fever, dysentery, death. Those who survive are marched to market. Families are separated on the auction block. Mothers torn from children. Husbands from wives. The auctioneer's voice rings out over the crowd, calling prices in pounds sterling, dollars, tobacco bales. Human beings reduced to ledger entries. A woman named Louisa Piquet, sold 8 times before age 20, will later testify. I was took from my mother when I was not more than a year old. I never seen her since. Multiply that grief by millions. The plantations of the South become laboratories of terror. Rice plantations in the Carolinas, where enslaved laborers stand waist deep in malarial swamps, cultivating crops that will make their masters wealthy and themselves sick. Mortality rates in the rice fields exceed those of sugar plantations in the Caribbean. Among the deadliest work regimes in the Americas, cotton plantations in Mississippi and Alabama, where the invention of the cotton gin in 1793 transforms slavery from a dying institution into an economic juggernaut. Cotton becomes king, enslaved people become the machinery of empire. By 1860, the 4 million enslaved people in the South represent more capital than all the railroads, factories, and banks in America combined. They are, quite literally, the foundation of the national economy. But capital does not bleed. Capital does not weep. Capital does not dream of freedom. People do. Frederick Douglass, born into slavery in Maryland, will write, "I have often been awakened at the dawn of day by the most heart-rending shrieks of an own aunt of mine, whom he used to tie up to a joist and whip upon her naked back till she was literally covered with blood." This is not metaphor. This is memory. Harriet Jacobs, hiding for 7 years in a crawlspace above her grandmother's North Carolina home to escape her master's sexual predation, will document the particular horrors faced by enslaved women. Slavery is terrible for men, but it is far more terrible for women. The rape of enslaved women is systematic, economically motivated, and legally protected. Children born of these assaults belong to the mother's master, increasing his property. The law of partus sequitur ventrum. The child follows the condition of the mother, turns sexual violence into profit. Thomas Jefferson fathers at least 6 children with Sally Hemings, an enslaved woman who has no legal right to refuse him. His original draft of the Declaration of Independence condemns slavery. He removes the language under pressure. He lives the contradiction until his death in 1826, freeing only 5 enslaved people in his will. All of them are Hemings family members. The rest remain in bondage. Resistance is as old as slavery itself. In 1739, near the Stono River in South Carolina, An enslaved man named Jemmy leads the largest rebellion in colonial America. Armed with weapons seized from a storehouse, 80 enslaved people march south toward Florida, where Spanish colonial law promises freedom to escaped slaves. They burn plantations as they go, kill more than 20 white colonists. The militia hunts them down. 50 rebels are killed or executed. Their heads are placed on posts along the road as warning, but the message of resistance spreads. In 1800, Gabriel Prosser organizes over 1,000 enslaved people in Virginia for a coordinated uprising. The plan is betrayed before it begins. Prosser and 26 others are hanged. In 1822, Denmark Vesey, a free black carpenter in Charleston, who purchased his own freedom decades earlier, plans an elaborate revolt involving thousands. Again, betrayal, 35 executed. The Emmanuel AM Church, where Vesey held planning meetings, is burned to the ground. In 1831, Nat Turner leads a rebellion in Southampton County, Virginia, that kills nearly 60 white people before being suppressed. Turner eludes capture for 2 months. When caught, he is hanged, flayed, and beheaded. His body is rendered into grease. Virginia legislators debate abolition in the wake of the terror, then choose instead to impose harsher restrictions on all black people, free and enslaved. The lesson is clear: resistance will be met with overwhelming violence. But resistance does not stop. Every act of sabotage, every work slowdown, every escape attempt, every poisoned master, every burned barn is an assertion of humanity against a system designed to deny it. The Underground Railroad becomes legend and reality. Harriet Tubman, escaped from slavery in Maryland in 1849, returns south 19 times. She guides more than 70 people to freedom, telling them, "I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger." She carries a pistol, not to protect herself from slave catchers, but to ensure no one in her group loses courage and returns, risking the entire network. "Dead folks tell no tales," she says. "You go on or die." The political crisis builds like a summer storm. The Missouri Compromise of 1820, the Compromise of 1850, the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, each attempt to balance slave and free states only delays the inevitable confrontation. In 1857, the Supreme Court rules in Dred Scott v. Sandford that black people, whether enslaved or free, cannot be American citizens and have no rights which the white man was bound to respect. Chief Justice Roger Taney, writing for the majority, attempts to settle the question of slavery permanently. Instead, he accelerates the march toward war. John Brown, white abolitionist and radical, believes only violence can end slavery. In 1859, he leads 21 men, 5 of them black, in a raid on the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, intending to arm enslaved people for a general uprising. The raid fails. Brown is captured by forces led by Robert E. Lee, then a colonel in the U.S. Army. At his trial, Brown delivers a prophecy: "I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood." He is hanged on December 2, 1859. Within 18 months, the country is at war. April 12, 1861, Confederate artillery opens fire on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. The Civil War begins, though its purpose remains contested. Abraham Lincoln insists the war is about preserving the Union, not ending slavery. But enslaved people understand what is at stake. They begin to flee to Union lines in such numbers that generals are overwhelmed. In Virginia, 3 enslaved men, Shepard Mallory, Frank Baker, and James Townsend, escape to Fortress Monroe, a Union-held position. When their master demands their return, under the Fugitive Slave Act, General Benjamin Butler refuses, declaring them contraband of war, enemy property subject to seizure. The legal fiction creates a loophole. Within a year, thousands of contraband flood Union camps. Lincoln, politically cautious, moves slowly on emancipation. But the pressure, from abolitionists, from black activists, from enslaved people themselves, becomes unbearable. On September 22, 1862, following the Union victory at Antietam, Lincoln issues the Preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. On January 1, 1863, it takes effect. The proclamation is limited. It frees enslaved people only in states currently in rebellion, not in border states loyal to the Union. It is a war measure, not a moral declaration. But for millions, it changes everything. Frederick Douglass, who has spent the war agitating for emancipation and black enlistment, calls it the first great step toward that righteousness which exalts a nation. Nearly 200,000 black men will serve in the United States colored troops by war's end. They fight knowing capture often means summary execution rather than prisoner of war treatment. They fight anyway. At Fort Wagner, South Carolina, the 54th Massachusetts Infantry, one of the first black regiments, leads a suicidal assault on Confederate fortifications. Nearly half the regiment is killed or wounded. Their colonel, Robert Goode Shaw, dies on the ramparts, his body thrown into a mass grave with his men. The Confederates intend it as insult. Shaw's father calls it honor. April 9, 1865. Robert E. Lee surrenders to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The war is over, slavery is dead, or so it seems. The 13th Amendment, ratified in December 1865, abolishes slavery, except as punishment for crime. That exception will become a loophole wide enough to drive a century of convict leasing, chain gangs, and mass incarceration through. But in the immediate aftermath, there is hope. Reconstruction begins. Freedmen's Bureau schools open across the South, teaching formerly enslaved people to read. Black churches rise, black political participation surges. Between 1865 and 1877, 2,000 black men hold public office in the South. Hiram Revels and Blanche K. Bruce become U.S. senators. PBS Pinchback becomes governor of Louisiana. State legislatures pass progressive constitutions guaranteeing education and civil rights. This is the moment when multiracial democracy becomes possible in America. And this is the moment when white supremacy organizes to destroy it. The Ku Klux Klan, founded by Confederate veterans in 1865, becomes the terrorist arm of white resistance. They burn schools, lynch black political leaders, intimidate voters. In Colfax, Louisiana, on Easter Sunday 1873, a white mob attacks black Republicans defending the courthouse. At least 150 black men are killed, many executed after surrendering. In Hamburg, South Carolina, in 1876, white paramilitaries murder black militiamen and ransack the town. In Wilmington, North Carolina, in 1898, a white mob overthrows the city's biracial government in the only successful coup d'état in American history, killing dozens of black residents. The violence works. In 1877, the Compromise of 1877 ends Reconstruction as part of a political deal to resolve the disputed presidential election. Federal troops withdraw from the South. Black political gains evaporate. The South begins constructing the architecture of Jim Crow. Segregation becomes law. Poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, every mechanism designed to circumvent the 15th Amendment and disenfranchise black voters while maintaining the pretense of legality. In 1896, the Supreme Court rules in Plessy v. Ferguson that, separate but equal, accommodations are constitutional. The doctrine is a lie. Separate is never equal. Black schools receive a fraction of the funding of white schools. Black hospitals are underfunded and understaffed. Black neighborhoods are denied basic services. The wealth accumulated during Reconstruction is systematically stripped through violence, fraud, and legal chicanery. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, in 1921, a white mob destroys the Greenwood district, known as Black Wall Street, killing as many as 300 people, and burning 35 city blocks. Prosperous black businesses, homes, and churches are razed. No one is prosecuted. Insurance companies refuse to pay claims. In Rosewood, Florida, in 1923, a white mob massacres black residents and burns the entire town after a white woman falsely accuses a black man of assault. Survivors flee into the swamps. The town ceases to exist. These are not isolated incidents. They are the enforcement mechanism of a racial caste system. Lynching becomes public spectacle. Between 1877 and 1950, nearly 4,000 black people are lynched in the South. Photographs of lynchings are made into postcards. Crowds gather as if for entertainment. Body parts are taken as souvenirs. Emmett Till, 14 years old, is tortured and murdered in Mississippi in 1955 for allegedly whistling at a white woman. His killers are acquitted by an all-white jury. They later admit their guilt to a magazine, knowing they cannot be retried. His mother, Mamie Till Mobley, insists on an open, casket funeral so the world can see what was done to her son. The image of Emmett Till's mutilated face galvanizes the civil rights movement. The movement does not emerge from nowhere. It builds on decades of organizing. The NAACP, founded in 1909, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the first black labor union to negotiate with a major corporation, the years of legal battles chipping away at segregation. In 1954, Brown v. Board of Education overturns Plessy. But a Supreme Court decision is not the same as justice. In Little Rock, Arkansas, in 1957, the National Guard must escort 9 black students into Central High School while white mobs scream hatred. In Montgomery, Alabama, in 1955, Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat on a bus. The resulting boycott lasts 381 days and catapults Martin Luther King Jr. to national prominence. In Greensboro, North Carolina, in 1960, 4 black college students sit at a white's only lunch counter and refuse to leave, sparking sit-in movements across the South. In Birmingham, Alabama, in 1963, police turn fire hoses and attack dogs on peaceful protesters, many of them children. The images shock the nation and the world. In Selma, Alabama, in 1965, state troopers beat marchers crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge, in an attack that will be remembered as Bloody Sunday. The violence is broadcast on television. America can no longer pretend ignorance. On August 28, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. stands before the Lincoln Memorial and delivers his "I Have a Dream" speech to 250,000 people. He speaks of a nation that will live out the true meaning of its creed, where children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. It is a vision, not yet a reality. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act outlaws discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act prohibits racial discrimination in voting. These are legislative victories won through blood and courage. But legislation alone cannot dismantle centuries of structural inequality. The wealth gap persists. Redlining, the practice of denying mortgages to black families in certain neighborhoods, creates segregated housing patterns that endure for generations. The Federal Housing Administration's policies actively subsidize white suburban home ownership while excluding black families. By the time redlining is outlawed in 1968, the damage is done. White families have built equity through home ownership. Black families have been locked out of the primary mechanism of wealth accumulation in America. Today, the median white family has 10 times the wealth of the median black family. This is not accident. This is design. Mass incarceration becomes the new Jim Crow. The war on drugs, launched in the 1980s, targets black communities with devastating effect. Crack cocaine, concentrated in urban black neighborhoods, carries sentences 100 times harsher than powder cocaine, used predominantly by white Americans. By 2000, 1 in 3 black men can expect to go to prison in their lifetime. The 13th Amendment's exception, slavery as punishment for crime, comes full circle. Prison labor becomes a multi-billion-dollar industry. Inmates work for pennies per hour, producing goods for major corporations. The chains have changed form. The bondage remains. Police violence echoes lynch law. Rodney King, beaten by Los Angeles police in 1991. The attack caught on video. The officers are acquitted. The city erupts. Amadou Diallo, shot 41 times by New York police in 1999 while reaching for his wallet. Sean Bell, killed by 50 shots on his wedding day in 2006. Oscar Grant, shot in the back while handcuffed and lying face down on a train platform in 2009. Trayvon Martin, 17, killed by a neighborhood watch volunteer in 2012. His killer is acquitted. Michael Brown, 18, killed in Ferguson, Missouri, in 2014. His body lies in the street for 4 hours. The protests that follow expose militarized policing and systemic racism to a new generation. Eric Garner, choked to death while saying, "I can't breathe," 11 times. His death is ruled a homicide. No charges are filed. Tamir Rice, 12 years old, shot within 2 seconds of police arrival while playing with a toy gun in a Cleveland park. Sandra Bland, found dead in a Texas jail cell after a traffic stop escalation. Philando Castile, shot during a traffic stop while reaching for his license. His death live streamed by his girlfriend. Breonna Taylor, killed in her own home during a botched raid. George Floyd, killed when a Minneapolis police officer kneels on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. His death, filmed by a teenager, sparks the largest protest movement in American history. Each name is a person. Each person had a family. Each family carries a grief that never fully heals. The list is too long. The pattern too clear. The legacy of slavery is not history. It is the school-to-prison pipeline, where black children are suspended and expelled at 3 times the rate of white children for the same behaviors, funneling them toward incarceration. It is the maternal mortality rate for black women, which is 3 times higher than for white women, a disparity that holds true even when controlling for education and income. It is the environmental racism that places toxic waste sites and polluting facilities disproportionately in black neighborhoods. It is the voting restrictions, voter ID laws, purges of voter rolls, closures of polling places, that echo the tactics of Jim Crow. It is the Confederate monuments that stand in public squares, erected not during the Civil War, but during Jim Crow and the Civil Rights Movement, as explicit symbols of white supremacy. It is the curriculum battles over teaching accurate history, because facing the truth requires confronting the lie that America has always been a land of freedom and equality. The truth is more complicated, more painful, more necessary. America was built on contradictions, liberty and slavery, democracy and disenfranchisement, equality and apartheid. For centuries, the nation chose comfort over truth, chose the myth of progress over the reality of injustice. But myths crack, truth seeps through. James Baldwin, writing in 1962, observed, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." The United States has not yet fully faced its history of slavery and racism. It has not reckoned with the fact that the wealth of the nation was built on stolen labor from stolen people, on stolen land. It has not grappled with the reality that every institution, economic, political, legal, educational, was shaped by and for white supremacy. It has not acknowledged that the injuries of slavery did not end with emancipation, but evolved into new forms of oppression. But facing this history is not about guilt. It is about understanding. Understanding how we arrived at this moment. Understanding why disparities persist. Understanding what must be done to repair the damage. Reparations, compensation for the unpaid labor of enslaved people, and the ongoing harms of systemic racism, remains a contentious debate. But the moral logic is clear: a debt was incurred. A debt remains unpaid. Some nations have attempted reckoning. Germany confronts the Holocaust with mandatory education and restitution. South Africa pursued truth and reconciliation after apartheid. The United States has yet to undertake a comparable national process. But the conversation is beginning. The 1619 Project reframes American history around the consequences of slavery. Critical race theory, though often misunderstood and misrepresented, offers a framework for understanding how race and racism are embedded in legal systems and structures. These are not attacks on America. They are invitations to a more honest patriotism, one that acknowledges both the nation's ideals and its failures, its progress and its ongoing injustices. A patriotism that says we can do better, we must do better. The arc of history does not bend toward justice on its own. It is bent by hands, by voices, by people who refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. It is bent by Harriet Tubman, leading people to freedom through dark forests and across cold rivers. By Frederick Douglass, using his voice and his pen to indict slavery and call America to its better self. By Ida B. Wells, documenting lynchings and demanding accountability when no one else would. By Rosa Parks, whose quiet defiance sparked a movement. By John Lewis, beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge but never broken, who spent his life getting into good trouble. By countless others, named and unnamed, who organized, protested, resisted, endured. The struggle continues, in courtrooms, where lawyers fight voter suppression and defend civil rights. In classrooms, where teachers tell the truth about history. In legislatures, where activists push for criminal justice reform and equitable policy. In streets, where protesters demand that Black Lives Matter. In communities, where people build networks of mutual aid and resistance. The chains of history still echo through generations. But so does resistance. So does resilience. So does hope. There is a cemetery in Charleston, not far from where enslaved Africans once disembarked at Sullivan's Island. The graves are simple. Many lack names. Some are marked only by stones or shells, but they are tended. Flowers are placed. Stories are remembered, because to forget would be to lose something essential about what it means to be human. To understand suffering and resilience, injustice and resistance, brutality and dignity. The history of slavery is not a story with a tidy ending. It is a wound that has not yet healed, a debt not yet paid, a reckoning not yet complete. But it is also a testament to the unconquerable human spirit, to people who survived unimaginable horror and built communities, families, cultures, legacies, who insisted on their humanity even when the law denied it, who fought for freedom even when freedom seemed impossible, who remembered even when the world tried to forget. Their descendants are here. Their struggle continues. And their story, our story, demands to be told, not to divide, but to unite around truth, not to shame, but to inspire action, not to dwell in the past, but to build a future that finally, truly, lives up to the promise that all are created equal. The chains may echo, but so does the sound of freedom. If this story moved you, if it made you remember the names time tried to erase, subscribe and help us keep their legacy alive.